Wow. Dear, beautiful, beloved community. My name is Sister Peace, and I am privileged and honored to be here in front of you this evening, along with my elder brother, Brother Phap Hai. And we want to share with you this evening about the practice, and we're going to attempt to do it a little bit differently. Maybe we'll let that be a surprise, huh? But first, I want to share with you about the overall theme of this retreat, which is awakening the ancestral heart. And when we were discussing it, and I was trying to think about, well, how best to share about that, I had to think back, of course, on my own practice and what was most immediate for me. And this past year, I have really feel fortunate to have been able to get in contact with my own ancestors in a way that I hadn't before. But let me pause a moment to say that when I talk about my ancestors, it's merely a convention. Because my ancestors are your ancestors, and your ancestors are my ancestors. So when you hear us use this word my, just know that it's all. And there are events, in all of our lives that lead to a moment of reckoning. And I feel that this year, I really began to want to get in touch more deeply with the ancestors. And when I asked the question, oh wow, if I had an insight, what I call an ancestral insight, I think, the ancestors have awoken in me. But when I listen more deeply to that voice, no, it is I who have awakened to the ancestors in me. Always, they and we are there. And I also want to maybe ask us to consider, well, who is an ancestor? Who in this room knows someone by blood or profession who is older or younger than them? Is that everybody? Right. Because sometimes we have a tendency to think that our ancestors are dead and gone. And that's one way of looking at it. We have many different ancestors, blood, spiritual, etc. But I also want to challenge us to think about and to get in contact with the ancestors that are living, that are sitting right here next to us. And they come in the form of our mothers and fathers, our sisters, brothers, aunts, uncles, cousins, co-workers. And if I asked you who were the youngest ancestors, what might you say? Otherwise, sometimes known as descendants. But they too are living ancestors. And so when we consider this, it's not just sort of, back there, it's right here. It's quite immediate. And one of the ways I guess I can express that for me personally is through a story. And this story I can share with you from a few years ago when we were at our monastery, Magnolia Grove in Batesville, Mississippi. And one day we got in the car, we were on our way to Oxford and to Memphis to just sort of tool around. And we happened to see, we passed, we said, oh, look, there are some cotton fields. And we said, oh, should we pull over? And we said, yes. And the moment the car started to pull over, something started to happen to me. But I took refuge in my brothers and sisters. I know the practice of stopping and breathing. And we got out of the car and we moved towards those fields. And I saw rows and rows of cotton plants. And in an instant, time and space were suspended. Because as I walked down those rows of cotton, I saw my ancestors in the fields. I saw them with 50 and 100-pound sacks of cotton. And I reached out to touch and to put in my hand some cotton. And of course the tears came, but it was just tears of connection and reconciliation. And in that instant, I thought to myself, here I am, it was the year 2014 maybe. I walked into that cotton field, a slave. But I walked out free enough to choose to be a nun. And that sense of suspension and freedom and recognition was so profound that I just saw the whole stream. And so this is just one way for me to express how we can get in touch with our ancestors. And I want to ask my brother how he practices with awakening that ancestral heart.
This is such a beautiful question and such a powerful moment to be together with you sitting here. For me, it's the fulfillment of a dream. I've had the opportunity to receive so much from your offerings over the years, and yet we've never had a chance to sit together and to share. So what a joy. Sister Peace and I share a love for story. We both feel that people remember the stories and the jokes and not the lists of things. So
is that an amen?
And I remember as a child in Australia, where I'm from, we have houses that are a little similar to some of the houses I've seen in the South, which are porches that we sit on in the heat of the morning and the heat of the afternoon, and sometimes the heat of the evening as well. And I'll never forget, as a young child, I would sit there. And my grandfather would be there. It would be dark, and there would be a little candle lit or a mosquito lantern, and he would sit and he would tell story after story after story, and we would say to him, "Pop, are they true?" And he said, "Well, like all good liars, now I believe they're true." We would sit there spellbound for hours. So I grew up on story. And when I'm reflecting on your question, how do I embrace the ancestral heart? That's a really challenging one for me. I look within myself, and I found that for a number of years, I was asking myself, which ancestors am I embracing? Which ones? Am I embracing the convicts, those that were deprived of their homes and put on repurposed slave ships and sent to Australia and in indentured servitude in many cases for the rest of their lives? Or do I embrace those who were the guards or the owners of these people for the length of their lives, or for 7 years or for 14 years. It was like a trip, as you could imagine, a trip to Mars these days. That's the situation that some of my ancestors were in. Or do I choose my ancestors of indigenous origin, the Gumbaynggirr people, who last year I went to a family reunion in my ancestral homeland. And in that area, it's an incredibly sacred place to us. It's a gathering place of my people. But it's also a place of great tragedy. It's where our indigenous people were rounded up and taken onto a headland and pushed off the headland. The waters were stained with blood. So the poem I read earlier is very visceral to me. There's a river that runs in that area that was filled with the blood of my ancestral people. Which ones do I choose out of the blood ancestors? Which ones do I choose from the spiritual ancestors? So I wrestled with that for a long time, and as I walked just last year in my ancestral homeland, where my father helped, and his father helped to create paths, and I was walking on the headland, and in the places that are sacred to my people, I had an understanding that when I'm at the level of my head, there's a problem, there's a struggle, there's a difference. But when I sink down to the level of my heart, I'm able to embrace the paradox. My left arm is the convict. My right arm is the owner of the convict, or those that sent them there. My right leg is indigenous, my left leg is Jewish, which I can embrace them all and allow that which wants to shine forth or be transformed in each moment come forth. So it's been a practice of being able to embrace that paradox. And for me, one of the big practices around that was learning to listen. And I feel that when we talk about mindfulness, we're also talking about learning to listen. Listening not only with our ears, but with all of our attention to our bodies and to each lived experience. What's your experience with listening, Sister Peace?
You know, when I hear you talk about paradoxes and the tragedies that happened in Australia and happened in Africa and happened everywhere, we all have a similar narrative, whether it's related ethnically, or whether it happens at our job or in our family, a situation. And when I hear you tell this story, it reminds me, you know, I've been very fortunate and able to go to Africa a few times. In fact, I was just there in Botswana and in South Africa doing retreats. But I remember after the first time I went, it was the same year that I went to the UK. And you know, as an African American, a large part of my narrative is going to be about, you know, slavery and healing myself and my ancestors and everyone, our ancestors, about that happening here in America. And of course, when I was in Africa, an interesting thing happened. Things came up, and I had to really listen deeply. You know, what we were told about being not good enough and less than was significantly challenged in an African country where people who look like me are the majority, and they're in charge of everything. It was beautiful to see, but one of the things that was so difficult for me to accept was, for some reason, I didn't trust it. Why didn't I trust it? But I embraced that. I listened. I didn't just throw it away and get done in anger. And sometimes we can address things right away, but sometimes we take them and we tuck them in our hearts, and we're tender and we're kind, and we forgive ourselves. I thought I had gotten over that. You know, I was the fly girl, feminist, and all this. But there I was faced with a stark reality. But I was grateful for it because I was aware of it. And I could transform it. And the same year, I went to the UK. And I realized, while it was an indelible moment, while we were in a train moving along, and I looked at one of my brothers from the UK and said, you know what? This is the land of my ancestors too. He said, oh really? I said, yes. You know, the Randolphs of Virginia came from here. He said, oh really? He said, what was your name? I said, that was it. He said, really? Oh, they didn't usually give the name. Well, they did. And suddenly, I realized a lot of the attention was going to only a part of me. And the blood of the oppressor, the blood of the slave owner, also ran in my veins. And I could see it was part of my duty, my obligation, my honor. To look. Say, these aren't two separate arms, they're connected. And get on with the work of reconciling and embracing that which in me, that, well, I guess some part of me knew it was there, but that part of me, those ancestors in me were also crying out for help and healing. So it is very true when we listen, and as we practice together this week, when we hear the sound of the bell, we stop. And we come back to our breath, but we feel our feet on this beautiful native land, this source of greatness. And every activity, every practice that we're able to participate in while we're here, we can do with this awareness of ancestry. And I want to just offer an itty-bitty challenge. When we were here the other day and I was looking upon the ancestors' altar, I had an idea. And I want to share this invitation with you, which is, here we are in this beautiful mountain, and many beautiful things in nature. And so, I want to invite us all as we go about and we're doing our walking meditation, and we're just moving about from place to place with mindfulness. Let us find 3 items. One item that touches us and helps us to be aware of those older ancestors, those who are no longer walking the planet anyway, maybe walking other dimensions. And let us also find a beautiful item in nature that reminds us of a living ancestor. And let us also find an item that reminds us of younger ancestors, our descendants. Could be blood, could be spiritual, could be friends or colleagues. As a way for us to contemplate and to connect. And we can bring those stories, we can bring those items, and we can share with each other in our Dharma sharing or our working group. Because the reality is that our ancestors are like trees, like olive trees. You know, above ground, they seem to be separate. But just a few meters beneath the earth, the root system is linked and supporting and nourishing each other throughout. And now we even have evidence through this beautiful book, something called The Secret Life of Trees, where scientists now know that trees also communicate above ground. And so I offer you this as a way, something to sort of walk with during the several days that we have to be here together.
When you were sharing about walking with your two legs and having your two arms as being part of one body, I was reminded of the fact that sometimes we refer to mindfulness as remembering. Our members, sometimes we refer to our arms and legs as members. So bringing our arms and legs, all the different cells of our body, our mind, every different part of ourselves back to this moment, back together. So in that way, each and every moment, if we give ourselves and the ancestors in us permission, can be a moment of presence, of meditation, of waking up. And as I was listening to you, I was also reflecting on the title of this retreat. And some of us might feel like, oh, I come to Deer Park and all they do is breathe and walk. That's all they do. They just do basic practice. When are they going to teach us something advanced? Let's all tell the truth. Like, we do approach the practice a little bit like, okay, we'll check this off and then we'll get to level 202. We've got to graduate from this and then there'll be a little bit more. It's okay, it's our human condition. And I wonder also, as I travel around, I've started to notice I've got antenna out, and as we shared earlier, we love stories. So we've always got our antenna out listening to different things. And I love listening to the slang words and that are going around. And I feel like it relates to something deep in our psyche, in the sense of the way that we relate to the basic practice. We feel like it's not quite good enough. And recently the word basic has become an insult. I found this out because I was in Trader Joe's, as you are here in California. And so I was buying, in case you're wondering, I was buying some graham crackers. I like the graham crackers from Trader Joe's there. And so I was in line, I had a box of graham crackers, and I had a whole lot of coins. So I decided there was only a couple of people behind, I thought I'll count out these coins there. I've been carrying them around for quite a while. I'll pay for these graham crackers with coins. So I was counting them out. It wasn't like I was paying with pennies, but, you know, it was probably 30 seconds. But as I was counting them out, this gentleman behind me said, "Oh, I hate getting stuck behind these basic Buddhists." And so...
No, he didn't.
Yes, he did. And so, you know, I turned and I smiled and, you know... I took it as a real compliment. Because basic means in and of itself. When and why did in and of itself become an insult? Becoming basic is the aim of our practice. It's the aim of this retreat. Breathing to breathe, walking to walk, sitting to sit, eating to eat. Graham crackers maybe, let's see if they appear. Doing one thing at a time. So you could say that we are monotaskers rather than multitaskers, and proud. I'm proud to be basic. I wear it as a badge of pride. And I hope you will too over these few days. Give yourself permission to do one thing fully. That one thing can be transformative. The title of this retreat is Awakening the Source of Understanding. And so for me, I've been really reflecting on this. The source of understanding being an open mind, a fully present being. But also I've been asking myself, what is it that we want to understand? The Buddha looked into suffering and the cause of suffering. This very big word, suffering. What is it that you need to look into? What is it that is being carried in your heart or in our collective heart at this moment in time? What are the noble truths that you need to wake up to? I'm reminded of this every time we recite the 7 insight gathas of what we call the previous Buddhas. They're all quite different. There's a commonality, but they're all quite different. So what is the insight? What's the question that's on your heart for these few days? What is it that is inviting you into understanding? To be on retreat at this moment in time feels to me to be not so much of a luxury, but to be a necessity. And so this can be an incredibly powerful moment of healing for us if we give ourselves permission to look into those questions that brought us here. But we tend to focus on the wrong things. We tend to focus on the unimportant things. Where's the creamer for the coffee? Why is there no sugar? Oh, the bell again, the bell. And there's a particular story that I love. I'm just gonna share this. I think you may remember this story through the week, I hope. There was a border guard in Austria, and on the border of Austria and Switzerland. And so he began work one day at the border, the land crossing. And so he was all amped up and really excited to be working as a border guard. I guess it was a fulfillment of a dream. And so he was standing there, and people were crossing the border, and he saw one gentleman come across with a wheelbarrow. And the wheelbarrow was filled with sand. And so he was, his other friend who was working at the border started to wave the gentleman through. And then the young border guard said, no, I'm going to check everything. This is a bit fishy. He's got a wheelbarrow full of sand. So he brought his little comb and he sifted through all the sand. And there was nothing there. So he had no choice but to wave him through. And this happened the next day, and the next day, and the next day. For 30 years, this happened. This man was coming through with a wheelbarrow full of sand, and every single day, this border guard was sifting through the sand. He knew something was going on, but he could never put his finger on it. He felt like he was smuggling something, but what could it be? So finally, it came to the day of our friend's retirement. So he was at the border on his last day, and he couldn't stand it anymore. This gentleman came through with his wheelbarrow of sand. And the border guard said to him, listen, this is my last day. I know you're up to something. I've never been able to prove it. Would you do me a favor and just tell me what it is? I promise there'll be no repercussions, just tell me. And so the wheelbarrow gentleman sighed. He said, all right, I'll tell you. I am smuggling something. And the border guard said, I knew it, what is it? He said, wheelbarrows. So, let us not lose sight of what's important during this retreat and in our life. And we laugh, yeah, it's a funny story, but we laugh also because this is our situation. We tend to focus on this little thing, but forget about the larger picture of what's going on. So in a retreat environment like this, we have an opportunity to sink down deep, to go to the next level, to the larger picture.
I think you're right. I feel that, taking advantage of this very precious opportunity of being together and sharing the practice, but also trusting. This is another big thing for many of us, but also us trusting that we're here on a sacred land. And we're creating sacred circles in all the things that we do. And we're sharing our stories tonight, and maybe you can share your stories and your insights. Because I think that when we find ourselves in places where we can do that, sacred, secure, we can be vulnerable. And it's when we share these stories that the real healing begins. Because awakening, I think, also means healing. And so we can practice this trust while we're here. Through all of the activities, the basics, as our gentleman at Trader Joe's was able to see. But I agree with you, because in fact it's our basic practices that are truly profound. And as you said earlier, it's not about transcending, it's about transforming. And my brother shared really wonderfully about that, so I'd like to invite you to say a little bit more about this transformation versus transcending.
Thank you. Sister Peace and I have had some wonderful conversations, and in our conversation yesterday we were talking about that many of us approach the practice with the idea that we need to fix ourselves. We need to get rid of something. When I get rid of this thing, everything's going to be okay. And the challenge of our time is to bring all parts of ourselves to our spiritual life. To not cut off part of ourselves, or to try to float on the clouds somewhere. We have enough saints who are floating on clouds. We need people who are walking on the earth, who have a little bit of dirt under our fingernails. Because wisdom comes when we're able to look with two eyes at our real situation, to transform, which is very different from transcending. One of the concrete ways that many of us approach transforming is through nutriment. And if we're really lucky during this retreat, we'll have 3 times a day where we have a chance to nourish ourselves through food. So what's your experience with mindful eating, Sister Peace?
Well, there are a lot of stories there. Well, when many of us first come to one of our practice centers, we see 2 or 3 tables of food, and we see all of those people standing behind us, and we see that food, and we go, I better take a little bit more. And we take a little bit more. And you know, that's that fear of not enough. It's not so much that we're that hungry or craving, but what about if this isn't enough? And there's not going to be any left. There's plenty. And when we practice mindful eating, we do a few things. First of all, we stop. We wait for everyone to sit together. And we listen to the invitation of the bell and the 5 contemplations. And then we begin to eat slowly. And we chew our food at least 20 more times than we're accustomed to. And if we're really thinking about it, we take our fork or spoon and we put it down in between each bite or 2. And when we do this, it slows down the whole process. And if we're really lucky, we're in contact and communion with the food. And we're not eating so fast because we're thinking about something that just happened or something that's going to happen, or we're angry or upset. So we're not hopefully eating our anger. But we're having a deep appreciation for the food in front of us and where it came from and how it got there. And I have a little, my own little, how can I say, small gata that I will say. if I'm not saying the 5 contemplations. But it sums it up for me, and it gives me a focus. And we can all do this. We're all familiar with our gathas and poems. But I say, thank you, cosmos, universe, harvest hands, processors, cooks, and rattling pans. And that way, the whole stream of how it got to me is acknowledged. And I can be a little bit more deeply in touch with it. And you know, we often talk here about vegetarianism or veganism and how we get there. So I'll share with you my chicken story. So, of course, I've been on the spiritual path back when it was called New Age. You remember that? Now, I don't even know what they call it now, but I was a New Ager. And I was doing yoga, and I went to the municipal building every week or so and was practicing. And I feel really lucky that I had a teacher, Kirsten, who not only taught us yoga, but also the spiritual practice behind it, the meditative practice behind it, and that of vegetarianism. We went, what? But she challenged us because it was some holiday, the buildings was going to be closed for 2 weeks. She said, just try it. Just try it. Just pick a meat or fish or chicken, something, and just see what you can do. And at this very sort of tender age, I was still in my 20s, I was being challenged with ulcer. And I had to take Tagamet. And it was a new thing for me, but I thought, okay, I'll try the challenge. And I thought, okay, I'll try and give up red meat. So 2 weeks later, man, I had no problem. And I thought, well, Tagamet, red meat. But I was kind to myself, and I listened to myself. And I tried to be aware of eating mindfully and listening to the craving, and could I really do without the red meat? And over time, about a year later, there was a moment when my dear beloved mother, who with all 6 of her children always had a birthday celebration and dinner, she said, well, what do you want? She knew what my favorite was. She says, I'm going to grill you barbecue ribs. And this was in winter with snow on the ground, which I deeply appreciated. But it was that day, and I had that last bit of rib that I knew, oh, I had come to the end. And then I thought, oh, you know, chicken was next. But it wasn't. It was fish that fell away. I thought, oh no, crab, lobster, shrimp. I really like to eat the things that took forever to finish. You know, you sit down with a dozen crabs or cracking the lobster. But that just instantly went, and I was challenged with the chicken. And for about 5 years, I white-knuckled it. You know how like when you're on a roller coaster and you're like this? And for 5, and I thought, okay, something's not right. Something isn't right. And though I didn't plan it, one day I went to my familial home. And I don't know, again, having asked the question continuously, why? I walked into the kitchen and I stood up and I said, why? What is it? Why can't I stop eating chicken? And in that moment, the revelation came. And I was a little girl, and my nose was barely over the stove. And my mother and my grandmother and my aunts and Aunt Wee Wee, the neighbor, and all those older matriarchs were cooking. And what do you think they were cooking? Fried chicken. chicken. Chicken and dumpling, chicken soup. Chicken, chicken, chicken. And suddenly, the insight came to me. Oh, my goodness. It wasn't the chicken I was craving. It was all those women, none of whom were in my life anymore. I went, oh. So the look of chicken or the smell of chicken or the craving was the craving for their comfort and for their presence. But then the real challenge came that, I didn't say, okay, now I know what it is and I can do this. The ancestors in me, my mother, my grandmother, my Aunt Jack, all of them said, okay, take your time. Be tender. Be forgiving. And over the next few years, gradually, was able to let it go because my body wasn't happy, but there was some part of me that needed the connection to know. And we know that the olfactory sense is one of the most strongest memory that we have. And so now, if I'm in Plum Village and I go to the local market, I see a wall of rotisserie chicken. I say, hey, y'all, how you doing? Hey, Ma, hey. Or I'm in a restaurant and someone's eating chicken next to me and I remember. So having this mindfulness, this awareness of eating every meal, especially those late night runs to Popeyes, I was able to find it, but the question always for any of us in any of these stories is to ask why. To not just get the information, but to say why. And so I feel really grateful now if I happen to come across something and I breathe in deeply and say hello.
Well, I didn't make too many late night runs to Popeyes. I mean, we don't have Popeyes in Australia, but as you were sharing, and you asked us to ask the question why. I was also thinking that it's sometimes our mind can be a little challenging. We know what we need to do, but we don't always want to do it. And I was thinking of a couple of visits ago to Australia. We have small corner stores that are mom and pop kind of stores on a lot of corners. So I was down there getting a couple of things for my sister. And in that store were all of these mixed candies. And these two little boys were in there with $1 each to get little bags of mixed candies. So they were talking together about which ones they would get. And I was standing behind them. They didn't realize I was there. It was really delightful because they were saying, we'll get this one, no, we'll get these, we'll get this. So they were so excited. And then finally they came up with their choices. So as the woman behind the counter was putting their choices into the little bags, one of the boys said to the other, we're going to get sick. And they were so excited. So edible food is perhaps the easiest way for us to recognize the ways in which we get pulled into something, which may not necessarily nurture what we're looking for, but we're also nourishing ourselves through sense impressions and other things, such as the deepest wish on our heart and the seeds in our consciousness. This is why I feel so many people feel wonderful when they're in an environment like Deer Park, because everything is in such a way that we are being nurtured each moment of the day. And I really want to invite everyone while we're here to take a technological sabbatical. You can do it. We know it's a little bit of a social media death if we don't update 3 or 4 times a day. I'm on retreat, I'm having breakfast on retreat, this is what I'm having. These kind of things, but you'll be okay. We've never been so connected technologically as we are now, and yet at the same time, somewhat paradoxically, I hazard to say we've never been so disconnected from what's right in front of us. We're a step back and we are recording it all for others. Can we give ourselves permission to be there for it during this time? I've got nothing against technology, it's fantastic. But I think it can be helpful for us to notice how we unconsciously reach for our devices whenever there's a spare moment. So if we have a device, it's a wonderful second body, it's a wonderful friend that we might want to leave in our room. If you can't give yourself a technology-free day, you can give yourself a technology-free hour. It's possible. And especially possible in this environment of Deer Park during these days that you have chosen to give yourself, to give your loved ones, and to give your community as a practice of renewal. One of the ways also in terms of taking a rest, that we choose to take a rest, is the practice of noble silence. And I was wondering if you might like to share a few words about how we can encounter noble silence during this retreat.
You know, when we think of noble silence, it's two, at least one sort of obvious thing. And I see a lot of faces here I know, so I have a sense there are many practitioners here already. I mean, good that have been to Deer Park or other centers a few times. So we hear noble silence and we think about, okay, that means not talking. And that's part of it. But noble silence can also mean calming all the senses, silencing. My brother just gives us the invitation of the technological one. But, you know, we have devices in our hands, but we also have a device in our head. And that's one that we can practice with by also calming and silencing as best we can, maybe not all the time, but during the night and after this activity even, moving into that space of calm and quiet. Now, of course, we all have roommates and we may have to communicate, but we do so in a way that's maybe not at the high volume, but a low, a whisper. And let us not be afraid to approach our friends, our roommates who may be forgotten, by offering to them, hey, if I forget, if I start to talk in noble silence, help me remember to be calm and to come back so that we can go into the evening with as deep a rest as possible. And don't feel bad if, you know, someone says that to us. We still have this practice among us as monastics. We have to remind it. And a way to help us to approach that is the organizers of this retreat and the beautiful little booklet that they prepared. They have a page called Daily Practice Notes. And it's based a little bit on a Kung Fu book that we do, where we actually record. What did we do this? How many times did we do this today? Just so that we can just have an idea. Are we concretizing our practice, or are we just sort of saying, oh yeah, I did that? And so we can set for ourselves a few things we like to practice throughout the day. Here in the examples, waking up, I smile, sitting meditation, walking meditation, eating meditation. And in this retreat, our organizers have really given us a gift. And that is to have our meals in silence. And even after we hear the bell, after 15 or 20 minutes, we may want to get up and get more food, we can continue eating in silence. So that is something that we can look and say, how did I do? And this isn't to say that it's good, bad, or indifferent, but it's having the awareness, because I believe that how can we possibly do better and change anything about ourselves if we're not aware of what it is we want to change? And then there are also some blank pages for after that for reflection. So one suggestion would be that as we're nearing the end of the day, we can take an inventory, take a stock, and reflect about the things that we wanted to touch base with on a particular day during this retreat. And maybe this is a practice we can even take home and enjoy. And coming to that place, and I think of noble silence with the example. Sometimes we think of the orange juice or the apple with the pulp, and you shake it up and you put it down. We see that's the mind calming. It also can be a little bit of a timer, as it were, for us to calm and to move into silence. So let us be aware, and let us help each other very mindfully, very skillfully, and using compassionate speech to help ourselves in this practice.
When we're in silence together, it can be really intimate, because we're just ourselves, you're just yourself. There's no jokes, no stories, there's no talk about the weather. So this can be really a moment of deep communication for us without words. In Buddhism, there are three aspects of our being: our body, our speech, and our mind. So usually when we think about noble silence, we think it's just about not talking. So I like to share with my friends, we've all been in situations where we're just not talking, and it's not necessarily noble, right? So the first aspect is our speech. Do I really need to say this thing right now? And if we're honest, 99.998% of the time, we're not going to need to share that thing right then. If on reflection we do, your room is on fire, then it's probably better to just share it out rather than to spend a lot of energy writing a whole lot of notes. I've been on retreats, yeah, we've all been there. I've been on retreats, silent retreats, and retreats that are silent for a day here and there, and then people have a sign that say noble silence, but they spend most of their time writing in a little notebook and holding it up for others. It's not noble silence, please. Can you give me the gift of not doing it, this retreat? So we really, speech is the first aspect. And then one of the other aspects is our mind. Where's my attention in this moment? What am I thinking about? Am I worried about something in the past, planning what's going to happen later, what's going to be for breakfast? What am I going to do when I leave the monastery? I have 10 different projects that I'm working on that I had to put aside to be here. Where's my attention in this moment? And then the third aspect is our body. What am I doing with my body? How am I interacting in space? And do I really need to do this thing, or am I just being busy? Also, can I practice total relaxation, which we'll have an opportunity to learn during this retreat? Going through each of the parts of our body and sending gratitude to our eyes, our heart, our liver, our lungs. Have we given ourselves an opportunity to do that recently? It can be a revelation just to come into contact with how our body's feeling. In this way, our silence becomes something more than just silence. It becomes something that's noble, something that's transformative. So I hope that you give yourself the opportunity to enjoy that together with us. We know that we've all been here quite a long time this evening, and we're really tired. So we wanted to end with a few minutes of sitting meditation. We can find a posture in which we feel completely ourselves. We feel completely relaxed. the paradox of sitting meditation, like many of the paradoxes in life, is that we bring an uprightness and a stability to our posture, but it's also relaxed at the same time. So what I like to do is I like to find a stable foundation. I cross my legs, or if I'm sitting on the chair, I make sure my 2 feet are on the earth. If I'm sitting on a cushion, I try to have my 2 knees in contact with the earth, and if that's difficult, I take 2 cushions, so I'm a little higher. And then what I like to do is I rock my body back and forth, not just because it's fun, but because I like to invite my spine into alignment. I notice that I become compressed, a little slouched over through the day. So I rock my body back and forth, and then I invite my spine into alignment. And as I do that, I notice that naturally my shoulders roll back very slightly and my chest opens. I then rest my hands in my lap and I gently close my eyes. If I'm tired, I'll leave them open. And then when I close my eyes, first of all, what I do is I notice some of the sensations in my body. So let's do that now. Perhaps we can notice the sensation of our body in contact with the earth. We might notice the space where there's no contact between our body and the earth. There's a space. Or in between our hands and our fingers. We might notice the sensation of our clothes on our body. We might notice the air touching our skin. Might notice some areas of warmth and coolness, or prickling or itching. We're just noticing. And then I bring my awareness to the sounds that I'm hearing. We might hear the sound of the crickets, the sound of voices, the sound of breathing. As I'm aware of sound, I just establish myself more and more in this present moment, what's taking place here and now. And as I come back more and more to my senses, to the sense of smell, and I begin to notice my in-breath and out-breath, wherever I feel it the most in my body. Perhaps the tip of my nose, the back of my throat, or my abdomen rising and falling. I might notice my breath at one point, or I might notice and follow the whole length of my breath. Breathing in, this is my in-breath, just as it is. Breathing out, this is my out-breath, just as it is. So we gather in all of our attention to dwell with the breath. From time to time, I might notice myself thinking about something or remembering something. And if I do, I note it, thinking, remembering, and come back to my breath. I bring the kind of attention to my breath that I would bring to a dearly beloved one I haven't seen for a very long time. In Plum Village, we call this enjoying our breathing. Our in-breath just as it is, our out-breath just as it is. So dear friends, as we prepare for a few announcements, we can release our legs and massage.